The wedding is off. I don't love you anymore. Caleb said it loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear, like he wanted the words to bounce off the wine glasses and land on every table before they landed on me. Saturday lunch in an Italian bistro in Portland goes from warm and noisy to dead silent in one breath. You know that feeling when a room suddenly remembers it has ears? I felt it. I felt the pause, the forks mid-air, the quiet little intake of strangers who weren't invited to my life but were about to get front row seats anyway. We had the window table, the one he asked for the second we walked in, like it mattered. Like he'd planned the lighting. My fork was still hovering above my chicken parmesan, and for a second my brain tried to do something kind, something stupid, something protective, like maybe I misheard. Like maybe he meant a joke. Like maybe there'd be a punchline. There wasn't. His friends were right there, at the table next to us, the same people he insisted should swing by for what he called a casual weekend lunch. They were watching with the kind of anticipation you don't notice until you've been hunted by it. One of them had the corner of his mouth lifted already, like he'd been waiting for my face to do something embarrassing. My name is Brooke, and I'm 27 years old. And sitting across from the man I spent 4 years bending myself into something smaller for, something inside me didn't break. It clicked. Like a lock turning. Like a latch releasing. Like my body finally understood what my instincts had been trying to whisper for years. I set my fork down gently, not because I was calm, but because I could feel how badly he wanted me not to be. Caleb stared at me with an expression I'd seen before but never named until that moment. Satisfaction, mixed with that hungry curiosity, like a kid who pulls wings off a butterfly and leans in to see if it can still fly. Thank you for being honest, I said. My own voice surprised me. It was steady. Clear. Like it belonged to someone who wasn't asking for permission. His eyebrows flicked up. That wasn't the response he'd rehearsed in his head. Slowly, I reached down and slid the engagement ring off my left hand. The ring he'd given me 2 years ago at his parents' anniversary dinner, of course in front of a crowd, of course with phones raised, of course with applause already waiting for my yes. I tucked it into my jacket pocket like it was just another receipt I didn't need anymore. You know what? I continued, and the calm got stronger, like it was settling into my bones. I think I'm going to throw a narrow escape party. There was a snort from his friend's table. A few chuckles. He smiled wider, like he thought I was spiraling into some cute kind of denial he could mock later. But then the laughter thinned out. Because I wasn't crying. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't doing the thing he'd been counting on to make him feel powerful in front of his audience. A narrow escape party, I repeated, and this time it wasn't for them. It was for me. Yeah. That feels right. I took a slow sip of water. Deliberate. Measured. Like I owned my hands again. Brooke, Caleb said, and now there was an edge under his voice, a crack of irritation. Did you hear what I said? I heard you perfectly, I replied. You don't love me anymore. The wedding is off. And I already thanked you for being honest. His jaw tightened. The plan was slipping. He could feel it. I reached into my purse, pulled out my wallet, and placed cash on the table. Enough to cover my portion, plus a generous tip for the server who was currently frozen in that polite professional limbo, pretending she wasn't hearing any of this. I have to say, I told him, standing up and gathering my things, you picked quite a setting for this announcement. He blinked. A crowded restaurant on a Saturday afternoon. The window table. Your friends sitting conveniently close enough to watch. Very theatrical. His face shifted, just slightly, like the word landed in a place he didn't want touched. I thought you deserved the truth, he said. And I got it, I said simply. More truth than you probably meant to give me. I looked toward his friends, 3 men suddenly unsure what expression they were supposed to wear. The amusement drained from them like someone pulled the plug. Gentlemen, I said, polite as ever. Thank you for being here today. Your presence has been illuminating. Then I walked out. I felt every stare on my back as I crossed the restaurant. But it didn't feel like shame. It didn't feel like humiliation. It felt like clarity. Outside, the cool air hit my face, and I breathed in like I'd been underwater for 4 years and someone finally stopped holding my head down. My hands weren't shaking. My eyes were dry. I walked to my car with measured steps, unlocked it, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door. Only then, in the quiet, did the weight of it drop onto me. Not devastation. Recognition. He hadn't ended a love story. He'd revealed what I'd been living inside. He'd shown me who he really was, and he'd done it on purpose. Not in a moment of emotion. Not in a private conversation where I could talk him into being kind. He'd planned it. And somehow, that made it easier to see the truth. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend, Naomi. How was lunch? I stared at the screen, then typed back, fingers steady. Wedding is cancelled. I'll explain later. But I'm okay. Actually, I think I'm better than okay. Her response came instantly. What? I'm coming over tonight. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and started the car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back at the restaurant one more time. Through the window, I could still see Caleb at our table, leaning toward his friends. He was probably telling them I was in shock. That I hadn't processed it yet. That the meltdown was coming. He had no idea what was actually happening. He'd just handed me the key to a door I didn't even realize had been locked. On the drive home, the memories lined up like they'd been waiting for permission to be honest. I met him at 23, fresh out of college, working my first job as an assistant event coordinator downtown. He was 25, confident, charming, the kind of man who could make you feel like you were the only person in the room, until you realized he didn't see you, he studied you. On our first date, he listened so carefully to my dreams of starting my own event planning business that I used to think it was romance. Now I can admit what it really was. He was collecting information. By the end of the first year, I was adjusting my life around his preferences. He didn't like my friends, so I saw them less. My apartment was too far from his office, so I moved. My business dream was risky, so I put it on hold. I told myself these were compromises, the normal give and take of love. But the giving had been mine. And I didn't fully see it until the day he tried to break me in public and I didn't give him the satisfaction. When I pulled into my apartment complex, my phone buzzed again. Caleb. That's not the reaction I expected. We should talk. I stared at it. And then I did something I hadn't done in 4 years. I didn't respond. That first night without answering him felt strange, like walking out of a room you've been trained to stay in. Like leaving a conversation mid-sentence and realizing the sky didn't fall. Naomi showed up around 7 with 2 bottles of wine and the kind of determined face that says she's ready to fight someone on your behalf, even if she has to do it in your living room with a corkscrew. Tell me everything, she said, stepping inside, scanning my face like she expected to find bruises. And don't leave out details, Brooke. I want the whole thing. So I gave her the whole thing. The window table. The way he requested it. The way he insisted his friends would just be nearby. The way the restaurant went quiet like the air itself got sucked out. The volume of his voice, like it was a line he'd practiced. The way his friends watched, too ready, too entertained. Like spectators. Like they came for the show. Naomi's expression kept shifting, concern to disbelief to a sharp kind of anger that settled behind her eyes. I knew it, she said finally, after I finished. Not smug, not dramatic. Just sad and certain. I knew something was wrong with him. That hit me harder than I expected. You did? I asked, and there was embarrassment in my throat. How long? Brooke, she said gently, pouring wine like she needed her hands busy to keep herself from shaking me. I've been your best friend since freshman year. I watched you change over the last 4 years. You used to argue with professors and map out business plans at 2 in the morning like it was fun. And then you started asking permission to grab coffee with me. I felt heat climb up my neck. I wasn't asking permission, I was just trying to be considerate. You were trying to survive, she corrected quietly. And I didn't push because you weren't ready to hear it. If I came at you too hard, he would have used it to isolate you more. I didn't want to give him another tool. Her words settled over me, heavy but oddly comforting. Because it meant I wasn't crazy. It meant someone else saw what I couldn't see while I was inside it. The thing that bothers me most, I said slowly, is that he planned it. Naomi's eyes narrowed. Of course he did. This wasn't impulsive, I continued. The more I said it, the colder it felt. He picked a public setting. He invited witnesses. He wanted people watching. He wanted to humiliate me in front of an audience. He wanted to break you, Naomi said, and her voice went steel. He wanted you to fall apart so he could look like the one in control. I stared at my wine glass, watching the surface ripple when my hand trembled just slightly. But I didn't, I said. No, she replied with a small smile that looked like pride. You didn't. And I guarantee that's driving him insane. Like the universe was on cue, my phone buzzed again. A message from Caleb. I think you're in shock. This isn't like you. Call me when you're ready to have a real conversation. I read it twice and felt something sharp flicker in my chest. He thinks I'm in shock, I said, setting the phone face down like it offended me. He's confused that I'm not begging him to reconsider. Naomi let out a laugh that had no humor in it. Of course he is. Men like that expect a certain reaction. Tears. Bargaining. Desperation. When they don't get it, they don't know what to do. I thought of his friends laughing at first, like my narrow escape line was some pathetic little denial. I thought of the way the laughter died when they realized I wasn't playing my part. What made them stop laughing? Naomi asked, like she'd read my mind. I sat with it for a second. I think it was when I didn't collapse. When I thanked him and walked out, they didn't know how to react. Naomi poured more wine into her glass. Good. Let them sit in that discomfort. It's the closest thing to consequences they've probably tasted in years. The word consequences made something click, and suddenly my narrow escape party idea didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt like strategy. You know what, I said, leaning back, I think I actually am going to throw the party. Naomi's brows lifted. Seriously? Yeah, I said, and the more I said it the more it felt right. But not to be petty. Not to mock him. I want to reclaim the narrative before he writes it for me. She tilted her head. Explain. Caleb is going to tell people his version, I said. He'll paint himself as the mature guy who had to end things. He'll frame me as unstable, or clingy, or pathetic, whatever makes him look clean. But if I throw a party celebrating my escape, if I frame this as a win, then he can't rewrite it as something that happened to me. It becomes something I chose. Naomi's face lit up, and for the first time that night her smile looked real. That's brilliant, she said. You're not the dumped fiancé sobbing into her pillow. You're the woman who dodged a bullet and is celebrating freedom. Exactly, I whispered, and it wasn't bravado. It was truth. We stayed up for hours, talking through the last 4 years like we were sorting through a messy closet, pulling out things I'd ignored, things I'd shoved to the back because they were too ugly to deal with. Naomi pointed out patterns I'd refused to name. The compliments that came with conditions. The kindness that came with debt. The way he'd slowly separated me from people who challenged him by making them seem negative or jealous or not good for us. The way he made me feel like any boundary I had was a personal attack. On him. There's something else, I said as the night got later, the room getting quieter, the city outside settling. Something about the way his friends were positioned at that restaurant. Naomi's eyes sharpened. What do you mean? His friend, I said slowly, replaying the moment in my mind, the one with the dark hoodie, he was holding his phone up. I saw it when I stood to leave. He was filming. Naomi went still. He wanted video, she said, voice low. The realization hit like ice water spilling down my spine. This wasn't just a public breakup. It was a production. Caleb didn't just want witnesses, he wanted footage. Proof. Content. Something he could replay, show, share, or hold over me. And that's why he looked confused when I didn't cry. He wasn't just losing control of me, he was losing the scene he planned. The clip he wanted. The moment he could point to and say, see, this is why I had to leave her, look at how unstable she is. Only he didn't get it. He got a calm woman taking off a ring and walking away with her dignity intact. What does he even need that for? I asked, More to myself. Naomi shook her head. I don't know yet. But I know this, Brooke, he didn't do all that just for closure. Something else is going on. That sentence stayed in the air between us like a warning. Because she was right. It was too deliberate. Too staged. Too hungry. I need to find out why, I said quietly. Not to change anything, but to understand what I was dealing with. Naomi squeezed my hand. Whatever you find, I'm here. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I looked at her, really looked at her, my friend who stayed close even when I drifted, who waited for me to see it without shoving me into a corner. The woman I saw today, Naomi added softly, that's the woman I've been waiting to see for 4 years. For the first time since that restaurant, I felt something that wasn't anger or shock or adrenaline. Hope. I went to bed that night exhausted, but not broken. My phone stayed face down on the coffee table like a dead weight I didn't owe life to anymore. The next few days, Caleb's messages came like clockwork, and the tone shifted fast. Sunday morning. This silent treatment is immature. Call me. Sunday evening. I didn't do this to hurt you. We need to talk like adults. Monday. People are asking what happened. You need to help me explain this properly. Tuesday. I heard you're telling people you're throwing a party. What is that about? Are you trying to embarrass me? I didn't answer any of them. And the silence, the simple refusal to move on his schedule, felt powerful in a way I wasn't prepared for. Because for the first time in 4 years, my actions weren't arranged around Caleb's comfort. They were arranged around my own. Once I stopped responding, something unexpected happened. The world didn't collapse. No emergency followed. No disaster showed up to punish me for not explaining myself. Instead, I had space. And in that space, I started untangling the practical parts of a life I'd slowly braided around someone else. The wedding had been scheduled for April, 6 months away. Deposits everywhere. Venue, catering, photographer, florist. All of it under my name because Caleb had insisted it would be simpler that way. At the time, I'd believed him. Now I understood it differently. I made the first call to the venue on Monday morning. The coordinator, Patricia, recognized my voice immediately. I'd worked with her before in my job, and she'd always been warm, professional, steady. When I told her the wedding was cancelled because my fiancé had ended things, she didn't sound shocked. She sounded unsurprised. I'm sorry, she said carefully. The deposit is non-refundable. But given the circumstances, I can offer you a credit for any future event. I paused, an idea forming so fast it felt like it had been waiting. Actually, I said, I might want to use that space sooner than expected. There was a brief silence. Oh. Would next month be possible? She sounded intrigued. What kind of event are you planning? A celebration, I said. Of new beginnings. The caterer reacted the same way. Sympathetic. Flexible. The photographer offered to refund half the deposit without me even asking. The florist, Dominic, laughed softly when I explained and told me he'd happily do arrangements for whatever I was planning, no labor charge. Each conversation left me with the same strange feeling. Relief. And something else. Recognition. When I told them the wedding was off because my fiancé had ended things publicly, more than one person hesitated before responding with some version of, I wondered how long it would last. Dominic said it plainly. Every time you came into my shop, you were stressed. You kept changing things because he wanted something different. Most brides change their minds, but you looked like you were trying to please someone who could never be pleased. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. By Wednesday, the shape of what I was doing became clear. The narrow escape party would be held at the same venue where the wedding reception had been planned. The deposit was already paid. The date would be 3 weeks out. Soon enough that the story hadn't cooled, but far enough to plan properly. Then I opened the shared wedding documents. And that's when everything shifted. Scrolling through the guest list, I noticed a second file I hadn't created. It was labeled Priority Notifications. About 40 names. Caleb's friends. His colleagues. A few family members I barely knew. Next to each name was the same note. Wedding update. Send immediately. My stomach tightened. I checked the document history. He'd created it 2 weeks before the restaurant. 2 weeks. Which meant the breakup hadn't been spontaneous. It hadn't been emotional. It had been scheduled. I kept digging. Buried in our shared files was a draft message he'd written in advance. As some of you witnessed today, I made the difficult decision to end my engagement to Brooke. This wasn't easy, but I realized I couldn't commit to a future with someone whose values and goals weren't aligned with mine. I stopped reading halfway through. It painted him as thoughtful, mature, tragic but principled. And it painted me as the problem. Misaligned. Unstable. A mistake he'd bravely corrected. My hands were shaking now, but I kept going. In another folder, I found messages sent to his friends the morning of the lunch. Today's the day. Bistro at 12:30. I want you there to witness. This is going to be good. And then the reply that made my chest go cold. Finally. Been waiting for this. I'll record everything. They hadn't just known. They'd participated. Then I found the message sent the night before, to a name I didn't recognize. Tomorrow I'm ending things with Brooke. I know you've been patient. I can't wait to be free and start our new chapter. Her name was Rebecca. I sat back from the screen, the room suddenly too quiet. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a campaign. A replacement lined up. An audience assembled. A narrative drafted. Evidence planned. The only thing he hadn't accounted for was me refusing to fall apart. My phone buzzed again. I don't understand why you're ignoring me. This isn't healthy. For the first time since Saturday, I typed a reply. I'm not ignoring you. I'm just no longer interested in conversations that serve your needs at the expense of my own. I think we're done communicating. His response came instantly. That's cold. I expected more from you. I turned my phone off. Because cold wasn't what I felt. Clear was. I organized everything. Screenshots. Timelines. Messages. Call logs. Not to expose him publicly. That would only feed the story he wanted to tell. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. And the truth didn't need me to scream. It just needed to be visible. The party wasn't about him anymore. It was about reclaiming myself. But if certain facts surfaced along the way, facts he himself had created, that wasn't cruelty. That was consequence. I drafted the invitation carefully. No names. No drama. Just an open door and one sentence. You're invited to celebrate a new beginning with Brooke. The guest list included my real friends. My family. Colleagues who'd watched me dim over the years. And yes, a few people from his circle too. Let them see me. Let them compare the woman he described with the woman standing in front of them. I didn't need to chase the truth. I just needed to stop hiding it. The next 2 weeks moved fast, not in a chaotic way, but with a kind of grounded momentum I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't obsessing over what Caleb might be saying. I was busy building something that belonged to me. Planning the party felt different from planning the wedding. There was no tightness in my chest, no second guessing, no imaginary voice asking if this choice would embarrass him or make him uncomfortable. Every decision came easily, like muscle memory returning. I chose colors I loved, deep oranges and warm purples, touches of gold that felt alive instead of sterile. I replaced the white roses he'd insisted on with sunflowers and wild blooms that looked like they'd grown wherever they wanted. String lights instead of chandeliers. Music that made people move instead of sit politely. People started reaching out almost immediately. Friends I hadn't heard from in years. College roommates. Former co-workers. Cousins I'd quietly drifted from while building my life around someone else's priorities. My old roommate, Lena. Called from Boston. I just heard the wedding's off. Are you okay? I am, I said, and surprised myself with how true it felt. It was the best thing that could have happened, even if it didn't happen the way I would have chosen. There was a pause. I'm going to be honest, she said. I was dreading that wedding. You didn't sound like yourself anymore. I kept hoping you'd wake up. I asked the same question I'd been asking myself. Why didn't anyone say anything? Because you would have defended him, she said gently. And pulled away from us instead. We were all waiting for you to be ready. That word again. Ready. I wasn't ready until he forced clarity so publicly, so deliberately, that even my instinct to protect him couldn't survive it. The invitations went out on a Tuesday. Simple. Calm. No hints of chaos or revenge. Just forward motion. By Thursday, the ripples started. Naomi texted me screenshots of conversations she wasn't even part of. People asking questions. Comparing stories. Trying to understand why a woman who'd supposedly been unstable was suddenly hosting a confident, composed celebration 3 weeks later. Caleb, I learned, was scrambling. He was calling people non-stop, warning them not to attend. Framing the party as proof I was unraveling. Saying it was attention-seeking, dramatic, a sign that he'd been right to leave. It had the opposite effect. Every warning made people more curious. Every frantic explanation clashed with the calm reality they'd witnessed in that restaurant. The day before the party, my phone rang with a number I almost didn't recognize. It was his sister, Claire. Brooke, she said cautiously. I heard what happened. I just wanted to check on you. We'd never been close. He'd kept me at arm's length from his family, something I now understood more clearly. I appreciate that, I said. I don't know everything, she continued, but I never believed what Caleb said about you. That you were unstable. Emotional. Difficult. I swallowed. What did he say exactly? She hesitated. That he was afraid to end things privately because of how you might react. That's not true, I said softly. I know, she replied. I watched you for 4 years. You never pushed back on anything. I used to wonder why. After we hung up, I sat with that conversation for a long time. If his own sister was questioning his narrative, how many others were quietly doing the same? Saturday came faster than I expected. When I walked into the venue that afternoon for a final walkthrough, the room took my breath away. It looked nothing like the wedding I'd planned and everything like the life I wanted. Warm. Inviting. Honest. My mom flew in 2 days earlier and cried the moment she saw me. I was so worried about you, she said, holding my face. And now I see you again. That night, she told me about the doubts she and my father had carried, the conversations they'd had about whether to intervene, the painful decision to wait. I prayed for clarity for you, she admitted. Not humiliation. Just clarity. Well, I said, he certainly delivered. The night before the party, Caleb sent one last message. I've been hearing things. People are talking. Whatever you're planning, remember I have my own side of the story. If you try to make me look bad, I will respond. I read it twice. Then deleted it. He was afraid. For the first time, he could feel the story slipping out of his hands. I went to bed feeling something close to anticipation. Not dread. Not anxiety. Just readiness. The guests arrived at 7. Naomi came first. Then Lena. Then a steady stream of people who felt like pieces of myself returning. People who'd known me before I learned how to shrink. By 8, the room was full. Laughter. Music. Easy conversation. And eventually, the question everyone was circling. So, what really happened? I didn't perform. I didn't dramatize. I told the truth when asked. Calmly. Factually. I showed screenshots only if someone wanted to see them. And the story shifted. Quietly. Rapidly. Around 10, I felt the energy change. I looked up and saw him. Caleb stood at the entrance, scanning the room, fury barely contained. He walked toward me like he owned the space, like he still thought he could control how this ended. What do you think you're doing? He hissed. I'm hosting a party, I said evenly. You're not invited. You're trying to destroy me, he said. You're lying. Showing fabricated evidence. I've shown nothing that. It was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and refusing to apologize for it.